Hey everybody, thanks so much for joining us today. I hope the content encourages you and helps you build your faith. Now enjoy the message.
So thanks for having us out today. My wife and I, her name is Courtney. When you meet her, you'll see her and you'll be like, what in the world did she see in you? We've been married for about 7.5 years, and on our honeymoon, one day into our marriage, I went to all-inclusive, all-adult resort, right? Because who can go to the kid resort now that we're officially adults? And so we went to one of those all-adult, all-inclusive resorts in Cancun. And I'll never forget, we're 24 hours into marriage. So like my confidence level is high. Like I got life all figured out. I know exactly what I'm doing. And my wife, she turns to me, we're getting ready to go to dinner, and she turns to me and she goes, "How do I look?" Now, ladies, this is a question that guys just don't really understand, okay? Because we can be mowing the yard, hot and sweaty in the Houston humidity, come in, run our fingers through our hair, look in the mirror and think, man, I look really good right now. So that's just a question we don't really get. So I turned to her and I looked at her all 24 hours married and said, "Honey, you look as good as the day I married you." And she looked back at me and thought that was the most romantic, cute thing I could have ever said. So in my heart, I'm thinking, phew, I made it through 25 hours of marriage. I think I got this thing figured out. Until we went to dinner. And as we go down to dinner, we're standing in line to get dinner, and this lady taps us on the shoulder and interrupts us, and she says, "Excuse me, but are you two, married?" And I look at her like, duh, don't you see the glow? Check out the bling. Come on, we got this all figured out. And she goes, "Oh, I am so sorry." She goes, "I thought you were 12 years old." And I looked back at her and I said, well, what? And she goes, "I thought you were 12 years old." And then she proceeds to say, "I hope you actually make it." And I'm standing on our honeymoon did you miss the wedding, honey? Because 24 hours ago, everybody's celebrating, saying, "You got this." They're throwing rice in your face. Life is good. You're confident that you're going to make it. But only 24 hours in, I woke up to the realization that no matter how high our plane of confidence is flying, there are times in our life where it feels like it is sinking straight towards the ground, that it's just taking a dip and a dive. And what we realize in our life, this morning's message is titled Confidence. And I just want to encourage you, because I believe God has a word for you this morning, and that's this, that it's not over yet. There will be times in your life where you feel like your confidence is diminishing, where it feels like it's taking a dip. But I believe that God would have a word for us this morning, and that is that it's not over yet. He's not finished with us yet. And I had to learn that the hard way 24 hours into marriage. I wish I had her phone number. I'd call her today and say, "Hey, nobody's counting, but 7 years, 4 months, and 2 days later, we're still going." And so you have to take a realization in your life that there comes these points in your life where things don't happen the way you had hoped they would, where people don't say the things that you were expecting them to say, or treat you the way that you feel you deserve to be treated. And what we find in time is that we live in a world where the storms of life and the things that people would do or say come at us in all kinds of directions, leaving us, making us sometimes feeling like maybe we can't make it. Maybe we're not good enough. Maybe we'll never get picked, or maybe things will actually never get better for us in our life. And I want to remind you this morning that in the moments of your life where you feel like you're up against a storm and you're not sure if you're going to make it out, that even when the world says that you can't, even when the world is screaming at you saying you're not going to make it, we serve a God who is sitting in the background whispering, saying, even when the world says you can't, I say that you still can. And so what we have in our life is we realize that there are these times where our confidence takes a dip. And I like to call these in my life confidence killers, things that just take the confidence right out of you. And we realize in those moments that we actually need something that will give us a boost or a leg up in life. The good news is, and as I read in Romans chapter 8, verse 31, I think it's one of the most encouraging, confidence-boosting scriptures in all of the Bible. And it says, if God is for us, who, or what for that matter, could possibly be against us? And we need a confidence boost that keeps us going. There's about 3 confidence killers that I think most people deal with. The first one is failure. It's the idea of a relationship along the way that has failed. Or maybe for you it was a career or a passion or a dream, something that didn't go the way you had expected. And you have a sense of failure maybe in your life. And if we're not careful, the confidence killer of failure, it can condition us to begin to believe that maybe we shouldn't even try again. I played baseball for a little while until the kids on the team got big enough to hit into outfield and actually reach me where I was standing out there, and I realized baseball was not for me. But I would step up to the plate enough times to realize, I don't want to go back out there, coach. It's this idea that you stand in the batter's box and you strike out enough that eventually you become conditioned to think there's no way I'm going back out there. And eventually, my failed career of baseball led me nowhere. I realized I'm not getting back out there. And if we're not careful, the same things can happen in our life. And a sense of failure in our life can lead to this binding sense of inaction. We get to a place where it's better to just not try again than to try at all. Maybe for you it's not failure. Maybe it's uncertainty. Uncertainty is this pressure that can creep in overnight. This pressure that seems to rise or build when we're not sure about where our future is going. We're not sure about how things are going to turn out. I don't know what season of life you're in, but maybe there's a sense of uncertainty when it comes to your kids. I know 24 hours into having a child, I'm like, I don't know what to do. This sense of uncertainty. I'm not sure what to do, how to solve the problem, how to fix the things with my child. And maybe you have a child who's teeter-tottering on the fence back and forth. And you're looking at their life and you're coaching them and you're guiding them, but you're just not sure which side of the fence they can fall on. And that sense of uncertainty can create a pressure that takes a toll on you. Maybe it's not with your child, maybe it's with your bank account. College students, you ever looked at your bank account? Thought there's a lot of uncertainty all up in here. And you're looking at your finances and the bills that come in, and you're wondering, I'm not sure how I'm going to make it through to the other side. And if we don't keep uncertainty in check, it can build and it can mount to stress in our life. And we look back and we find ourselves in this place where we're looking back saying, I just don't know what to do in the middle of the storm that I'm in. If it's not failure or uncertainty, fear is sure to get us. Fear, it's like a thief that sneaks in the night and tries to steal your TV. You know, the thief who wants to come into your house. You think about it. If you had somebody, a stranger, walk off the street and walk into your house and sit down and try and enjoy the popcorn with you and your family while you watched the movie, you'd say, no way. Get out of my house. But you see, that's what fear does in our life. It's like the thief who sneaks in the night and gets inside of us internally and gets in our heads and gets in our hearts, and we find ourselves in a situation where we are fearful of rejection. We're fearful of loss in our lives. We're fearful of the future. We're fearful sometimes of not knowing the answer to some of our biggest problems in life. And it's in those moments that we find ourselves needing a boost of confidence. You know, when Courtney was pregnant, I was a good husband, y'all. I was real good. I went to all her doctor's appointments, you know, for moral support, you know, and she gave me this big old book I was supposed to read, and I read it all, every page, all 576. And this book tells you all the things you're supposed to do as a supportive husband, right? And so one of them, it says, just be there for moral support. And, you know, you're thinking, okay, she's pregnant, like she has to do all the hard work, I just get to be the cheerleader. So we go into the doctor's office one day, and the doctor looks at me, and the doctor goes, you need to get a shot. And I said, I'm sorry, she's pregnant, not me. And the doctor goes, no, you need to get a shot. It's called a Tdap booster shot. And I'm like, sorry, Needles and I, we're just not that good of friends. I don't think so. And the doctor proceeded to tell me, no, you need to get this booster shot. Because when you get this booster shot, it's going to keep you from getting sick, and it's going to keep your child from getting sick. It's going to help protect you in the moment when you need it the most. And I told the doctor, I'm not sick. The doctor says, you're missing the point. You see, you get a booster shot not because you're sick right now. You get a booster shot because it builds up the immunization inside of you. It gives you this boost so that in the hours and the moments when you need it the most, it's there for you. And the same comes to our faith. You see, the Lord wants to build our confidence in such a way today so that you have the strength that you need tomorrow to face the storms that may come your way. You know, there's all kinds of storms that we face. In the Bible, there's 3 stories that I'm thinking of right now of people who found themselves in the midst of a storm and needed a confidence boost. You know the story of Jonah and the whale, right? a storm came about. Jonah ends up overboard in the belly of a whale. You know, that one doesn't give me a lot of confidence, so I think we'll skip on that one. But then there's the story of Jesus and the disciples. Jesus and the disciples find themselves in the midst of a storm on their boat. The only problem is Jesus is sleeping. So the disciples approach Jesus and say, what are we going to do? But then a third story about a ship on the ocean in the middle of a storm comes from the book of Acts. In Acts chapter 27, that's where we're going to be this morning, is the story of Paul. Now, Paul is on a ship headed to a place he never wanted to go. And he finds himself in the midst of a storm with a bunch of men. And so we're going to read this story this morning. In Acts chapter 27, here's what it says. Verse 14. Before very long, a wind of hurricane force called the northeaster swept down from the island. The ship was caught by the storm and could not head into the wind, so we gave way to it and we were driven along. As we passed to the lee of a small island called Cauda, we were hardly able to make the lifeboat secure, so the men hoisted it aboard. Then they passed ropes under the ship itself to hold it together, because they were afraid they would run into ground on the sandbars of Syrtis. So they lowered the sea anchor and let the ship be driven along. We took such a violent battering from the storm that the next day they began to throw the cargo overboard. And on the third day they threw the ship's tackle overboard with their own hands. And when neither sun nor stars appeared for many days and the storm continued raging, check this, we finally gave up all hope of being saved. You see, Paul and 276 men are on a boat in the middle of the ocean. And Paul looks at everybody on the ship and he says, here's the deal, guys. The movie hasn't come out yet, but you're going to see it one day, called the Titanic. And this boat is going to be like the Titanic. It's going down. But the good news is this. Everybody here gets to play the part of Rose. Nobody has to be Jack today. And Paul is looking at the guys on the ship in the middle of the storm saying, I know things are a lot tougher than you expected. I know that this is hard. You see, they're on a ship, and it says that the ship is being driven along by the wind. In other words, they lost all control of the ship. They were at the mercy of the seas. And they're being driven along so much so that they decide, you know what, there are some things we need to do. They start throwing the ship's tackle and the unnecessary items, the things that used to have value to them because they were going to another port to sell. They begin to throw off the boat because they say, you know what, in the middle of this storm, it's not as important as I used to think it was. And it gets so bad in the storm that somebody gets a bright idea. You know, when a bunch of guys are around and they get a bright idea and you're like, I don't think that's a bright idea. Somebody grabs some ropes and says, you know, our ship is really getting beat up, so I think we should just tie the ship together. And somebody takes a rope and they literally pass it under the boat and they tie the ship together. It's literally hanging on by a thread. And I don't know about you, but if a boat is being held together by a rope, I think I'm jumping off. And these guys are out in the storm for days. And all of these things are happening. It gets so bad that they say, you know, what would happen if we get too close to shore? What would happen if we're starting to ram into shore? You know what we should do? We should throw the anchor. And so somebody gets another bright idea. They toss the anchor off the ship, and it's dragging along the ocean floor. And as it's dragging along, their hope or their thought is this: maybe it will slow us down enough so that when the storm throws us into the rocky shore, we won't crash too hard. I don't know about you, but sometimes when I read the Bible, I'm thinking, okay, are you talking to me or are you talking to everybody else? You know, it's this idea. Have you ever met those guys, you know, you've seen on the lake, the people who named their boat? Right? They got a big name written across the back of the boat. And you're like, is that the name of your boat or like your girlfriend or your wife? I mean, what is this name? And so you read the Bible, and sometimes what you find as you're looking, you're like, are you talking about a ship or are you talking about my life? Because sometimes what we do is we find ourselves in the midst of a storm of our own. Our confidence is depleting because we've been looking at the storm for a lot longer than we thought we would. And we're looking like the men are looking out, and the sky is dark for day after day after day. And we begin to wonder ourselves in our own life, man, is it ever going to get better? Are things ever going to change for me? I don't know about you, but there's been a few storms that I wasn't expecting. There's been a few things come up that I thought I was strong, but when I found myself in the midst of it, what I found myself doing was throwing cargo overboard. The things that used to matter to me don't matter as much because of the circumstance of the storm that I'm in. I don't know about you, but maybe there's been some times you feel like you're carrying some weights. And like the men on the ship who took the anchor and threw it overboard, You feel like those weights are bound around your ankle and dragging along as you're trying to do life, pretending like they don't exist, but there they are. And this is the case for Paul and the men on this ship. They find themselves in this situation. And then Paul stands up and he says something very profound, because they get to a place where they feel like all hope of being saved is lost. In other words, it's better to not get up and try again because it's over. And Paul stands up and here's what he says. In essence, he says, men, there comes a point in time in your life where you have to realize that you don't have to surrender to the storm. There may be a storm that you're facing or something that you're going through that is pulling and tugging on your confidence. And Paul stands up and says, if you surrender to Jesus, you don't have to surrender to the storm that you're facing. And Paul goes on in Acts 27. Here's the end of the story. Here's what happens. He says this, after they had gone a long time without food, Paul stood up before the men. And he said, men, you should have taken my advice. Don't you love those people who in the middle of your mess up love to look at you and say, I think I told you that. I think I reminded you of that, son. And he says, you should have taken my advice not to sail from Crete. Then you would have been spared yourselves this damage and loss. But now I urge you to keep up your courage, because not one of you is going to be lost, but only the ship will be destroyed. He says, last night an angel of the God to whom I belong and the God to whom I serve stood beside me and said, don't be afraid, Paul. You must stand trial before Caesar, and God has graciously given you the lives of everybody on this ship. So keep up your courage, because I have faith in God that it will happen just as I have said. There comes a point in time in our life where we find ourselves in the midst of a storm and we have to make a decision. You see, Paul stood up in that moment and he chose to do some things that I believe this morning we can take away as ways that we can restore our confidence in the midst of the storm. Ways that we can begin to build confidence. One of the things that Paul says to the men is he says, resist and refuse the fear that wants to come your way. We have to learn how to resist or reject or refute the fear that wants to come our way. What we realize is this: if we want confidence, our confidence levels to increase. If we want to grow in the amount of confidence and the courage that we walk about our lives every single day, then we're going to have to begin to resist fear. Because here's the thing about confidence. Confidence does not grow in a waterbed that's watered with fear. If you were to take confidence and place it in the soil like a seed and begin to water it, if you watered it with fear, it would never grow. And sometimes what we realize in our life is there are some things that we've planted beneath the surface and we thought it would make us more confident. Man, the ladies like me today. Our confidence grows. But what we realize is there's no roots beneath the surface. Man, I got a promotion at work today. Man, I'm feeling better about myself. Man, things are going good. And what we find is that it doesn't actually produce the roots that we need in the middle of the storm. And so we can't allow fear to creep in. One of my favorite verses is Isaiah chapter 41, verse 10. Here's what it says. It says, do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you, and I will help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. And like Paul standing up before the men in the storm, he's saying, I see what you're seeing. I see the storm and the battle and the things you're going through, but trust me, do not be afraid. Does anybody have a crazy uncle or aunt? Crazy uncle or aunt? Okay, raise your hands. Crazy uncles, aunts? Okay. If you didn't raise your hand, that's probably because you are the crazy uncle or aunt. So, I have a crazy uncle. His name is Les, and by crazy, I mean the definition of crazy was written after him. He actually lost his left arm, and he has a prosthetic arm, old school style, with a metal hook, okay? So crazy Uncle Les likes to fish, and he smoked so many packs of cigarettes a day. And as a 12-year-old boy went on a fishing trip, he's sitting in the corner of the room. Every night you'd walk up like 2 a.m. to go to the bathroom. He's sitting in the corner with his hook, smoking a cigarette. His voice is raspy as all get out. I mean, he is scary, people, okay? At 12 years old, I was still wetting my pants. And we were on this fishing trip, and actually, do you want to know how he lost his arm? I don't know if I should actually tell you that, but... Luke, will you have me back? He likes to fish, okay? Every fisherman's dream is, how can I catch more fish? So one day, crazy Uncle Les got the idea, if I take a stick of dynamite with me, I will catch more fish out of this pond. The only problem was the dynamite didn't make it to the water. So crazy Uncle Les, though, he wasn't done. He's a true fisherman, okay? It's fishing season. He was not giving up. And so we're going along, my dad, my crazy Uncle Les, and I on the fishing boat. It's a 10-foot John boat, okay? The weight is supposed to go in the back, okay? But Captain Hook decides he gets to sit in the front. And that's just not where you put a 350-pound plus man. And we're going along. I'm 12 years old, and we're cruising down the lake at 20 miles an hour, as fast as that little thing would go. And old people and babies, they have this thing. They can fall asleep anywhere they go, right? Anywhere they go. So, you're at dinner with your grandpa, and he just falls asleep, right? Okay. We're cruising down the lake, and crazy Uncle Les just falls asleep. The only problem was he didn't stay in his chair. And in that 3-foot wide boat, crazy Uncle Les fell asleep, fell over in the boat, and all of a sudden our boat goes, and for the next 2 minutes, we are doing circles in this boat. And I'll never forget in that moment, I'm 12 years old, I'm freaking out. My dad, he grabs me and he throws me into the other side of the boat and throws himself on top of me, right? He's trying to counterbalance the weight of the man who's causing us to do this. And in that moment, my dad, I can remember this vividly. Those moments you'll just never forget. I remember my dad reaching over while I'm screaming, Uncle Les is sleeping, and he reaches over and he pulls the kill switch on the motor, and we just stop. And we just stopped right there in the water and all try and roll back into our places. And I remember that moment, and I've never been on a shipwreck like Paul. That's the closest thing I've ever gotten, okay? But I realized something as I look back at that time in my life. There are 3 ways that you can face your storm. Number 1, you can be like Uncle Les and sleep your way through it. The second option is this: you can freak out. But the third thing that as a 12-year-old boy I was required to do is you can trust your father to do what your father knows how to do best. You see, you find yourself in the midst of this storm, your confidence is lost, and you're like, I have no idea what to do. Let me tell you, the secret answer is not fear. The secret answer is not freaking out. That got me nowhere. The answer in the midst of the storm and the trials of life and the confidence that's diminishing is to turn your trust to the Lord, because He's the only one who can do anything about the thing that you're facing today. You have to resist and reject the fear in your life. The second thing that you have to do is this: you have to remember that God always finishes what He starts. Philippians chapter 1 verse 6 says this: be confident of this, He who began a good work in you will carry it on to completion until the day of Jesus Christ. Be confident. He says, no matter what you're going through, you can be confident. You see, where we go wrong is we think, man, if my life was a little bit easier, I could be a little bit more confident. Man, if things weren't so hard, I would have more confidence. But here's what that's doing. That's putting our confidence in the condition of our circumstances. God never designed or wired you to grow in confidence based off the circumstances that are around you. Rather, He says it's not the condition of your circumstances, it's the conviction of your calling. It's this conviction deep within inside of you that says, even in the middle of this storm, even in the middle of this battle, I can be strong because the Lord has made me and wired me to be strong. It's the confidence, the conviction inside of you that says, I know that God is working things out behind the scenes. And even though I'm looking around and I'm not seeing what I'm hoping for, and even though I'm looking around and I'm not feeling the way I hoped that I would be feeling by this season of my life, I am fully confident of the conviction inside of me that God always finishes what He starts. I don't know about you, but my garage is full of projects that are not finished, right? There are a lot of things that we start. We live in a culture that loves to start and does not love to carry on with perseverance to finish. But that's not who our God is. You see, we can trust in Him and trust in the conviction of our calling that God always finishes what He starts. And if He started with you, let me tell you something this morning, He's going to finish with you. He doesn't get going and think, man, I got too many projects to work on. Look around. You see all those people around you? He doesn't think, oh man, there's too much going on in my life. My schedule's too busy. I don't have time for you. God always finishes what He starts. And the final thing that we learn from Paul in the midst of the storm as he stands up and he tells these men, the final thing we learn from him is this. He's in essence standing up saying, don't quit. Don't quit. Reject the fear. Remember that God always finishes what He starts. And finally, don't quit. Hebrews chapter 4, verse 14 says, we can hold fast to our confession. Let us draw near to the throne of grace with confidence, that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us where in our time of need. He doesn't say you can hold fast to your confession when everything is going great. That's the only time it works. He says the opposite. He says in the middle of your time of need, you can have confidence. The level of your confidence has absolutely nothing to do with the amount of pressure that you're facing. You see, I think sometimes we think, I got too much pressure, I can't be confident. It's not about your pressure, it's about the perspective that you have in the middle of that storm. The level of your confidence has nothing to do with the amount of pressure you're facing, but by your perspective on the pressure you're going through. How can you say that? You're 30 years old, what do you know? I look at Paul's life, and I look at Paul in the middle of the storm. You see, the pressure on all 276 other men was the same amount of pressure that Paul was facing. You see, they all sat in the exact same storm. Their conditions were the same. You see, every one of them, every night, in the hunger pains that they had for not eating for days, was looking out into the same exact dark sea in the void of all the things that were going on with the same amount of pressure in their lives. And yet, the difference was Paul had the confidence in the midst of that moment to say, let me tell you something. This is what God says will happen. God is going to not let us give up out here. God is going to help us push through and make it to the end. There's a guy at the Conroe campus of the Ark Church that we met. We were doing a youth baptism service on a Wednesday night, and one of our staff members ran into their neighbor that afternoon. His name was Travis, and he didn't know this at the time, but Travis came over to his house and was standing on his front porch, and when you looked at Travis, his skin was completely yellow, and he just did not look well, and he told one of our staff members, he said, I've been given a diagnosis of liver failure, and they can't get it out of me, and I need a liver transplant, and things are not looking well for me and my family. And he said, the doctors have given me a couple of weeks to live. And he looked at the staff member, his name is Chris, and he said, hey, I just want you to know, I came to your church a few times, and if there's one regret that I have, it's not getting baptized. And he says, I just really wish that I would have gotten baptized. And Chris looked at him and said, well, just so happens that we're baptizing about 60 teenagers tonight. Why don't you come and hop in the baptism tank with them? And Travis, who is in complete liver failure, comes to get baptized that night. Because if you can imagine with me for just a moment the amount of fear that's going through his life in that moment, the amount of uncertainty about his conviction that God is going to see him through it, and all the things that are going on in his life, he's in the biggest storm he's ever been in. And he comes and he gets baptized. 2 days later, he goes to the doctor, and the doctor runs his usual weekly tests. And the doctor says, come back on Monday. We have some unusual things that we've noticed, and we just want to talk about it. So he comes back on Monday, and the doctor says to Travis, he says, Travis, liver enzymes are supposed to be at 300. Yours are at 3,000. Complete liver failure happens at 2,000. You're 1,000 count past liver failure. You're not supposed to be alive. And the doctor looks at Travis and he goes, but over the weekend, your liver enzymes went from 3,000 to 260. And the doctor looks at Travis. I know this guy. We've had this conversation. I'm not making this stuff up. I looked at Travis and I said, well, what did you tell the doctor? The doctor looks at Travis and says, what did you do? And Travis turns back to the doctor and he says, I got baptized. I got baptized. You see, for him, he experienced the storm in his life, but he had the strength and the confidence built up to say, no matter what the doctors tell me, no matter the things that I'm facing, no matter the fear that I have, I'm going to go do what God is calling me to do. And look what happens in his life. And I just think that's one little piece of the picture for you. That what would happen when our confidence grows because we're willing to put our conviction and our hope in the fact that God has our back. And he's not done with us yet.
Everybody, thanks again for joining us. We believe God has something great for your life, and we hope this message encouraged you to take the next step in your faith. Have a great week.